I could fight it, hire a lawyer, drive the family into an ugly legal battle that would drain the restaurant's resources and destroy what remained of our relationships. Or I could take the money and walk away with my dignity intact. I'll need to think about it, I said, rising from the table. Anthony frowned. We need an answer by Friday. Marco is ready to start next month. So they'd already hired him. This meeting wasn't a discussion. It was a formality. My replacement was already waiting in the wings. I nodded stiffly and left without another word, walking the 3 blocks to my small apartment in a daze. Inside, I collapsed onto my couch, finally allowing the tears to flow freely. Hours later, after the initial shock had worn off, I found myself sitting at my kitchen table with Nana's recipe journal open in front of me. Her elegant handwriting filled the pages with not just ingredients and instructions, but stories about each dish, when she created it, who had taught her the technique, which family celebrations had featured it. On the inside cover, she'd written words I'd read countless times. Cooking is love made visible. When they taste your food, they taste your heart. I traced the words with my fingertip, suddenly realizing something. No one could take this from me. Not my skills, not my passion, not the true essence of what made our food special. 3 days later, I signed the buyout agreement. Anthony looked triumphant, Maria relieved, and Matteo vaguely guilty as I handed back the signed papers. You're making the right decision, Matteo assured me. A fresh start. I smiled for the first time that week. I think you're right about that. The next morning, with $250,000 in my bank account and no job for the first time in my adult life, I did something unprecedented. I slept until 9 a.m. Then I took myself out for breakfast at a small cafe I'd always admired but never had time to visit. Over the next 2 weeks, I did all the things I'd been too busy for. Visited museums, took long walks along the harbor, read books that had been collecting dust on my shelves. I reconnected with culinary school friends I hadn't seen in years. One of those friends was James Chen, who had become a successful restaurant consultant after his own executive chef career. I still can't believe they pushed you out, he said as we shared drinks at his downtown apartment. Bella note without Elena Rossi? It's unthinkable. I shrugged, trying to appear more nonchalant than I felt. Apparently, traditional Italian cuisine isn't trendy enough anymore. It wants someone who'll put foam and gel dots on the carpaccio. James snorted. Marco Valentini, right? I've met him. Talented technically, but no soul in his cooking. All flash, no depth. Well, he's their problem now. I took a sip of my wine. I'm thinking of traveling for a while. Maybe spend some time in southern Italy, explore regional dishes I haven't mastered yet. James studied me thoughtfully. Or you could open your own place. With $250,000 in Boston, that might cover the lease deposit and some equipment, but not much else. Not necessarily a full-service restaurant right away, he clarified. Start smaller. Build your brand independently of the Rossi name. I considered this. Like a food truck or a catering business. Actually, James said, setting down his glass, I might have a better idea. Have you heard of Cucina Privata? I shook my head. It's this new concept taking off in New York and LA. Private dining experiences in unexpected locations. Limited seating, reservation only, no fixed address. The exclusivity drives demand insane. People wait months for a spot. As James explained more, a plan began to take shape in my mind. Not just any plan, but one that would allow me to cook exactly what I wanted on my own terms while building something completely mine. 2 months later, Tavola Segreta, the secret table, hosted its first dinner. In the renovated ground floor of an old fire station I'd leased in the emerging Fort Point neighborhood, just 15 guests gathered around a single long table. The space was deliberately understated. Exposed brick walls, simple wooden furniture, vintage Italian photographs, and a completely open kitchen where guests could watch every dish being prepared. The menu was a journey through my family's culinary history, with each course introduced by a story about its origins. I served the dishes myself, explaining techniques and ingredients, creating an intimate experience impossible in a traditional restaurant. Word spread quickly. The limited reservations, just 4 seatings per week, 15 guests each, created exactly the exclusivity James had predicted. Within a month, we were booked solid 3 months in advance, with food bloggers and social media influencers desperately trying to secure spots. What made Tavola Segreta different wasn't just the format, but the food itself. Free from the constraints of restaurant economics, I could source the absolute finest ingredients without compromise. I didn't need to worry about food costs when charging $175 per person for the tasting menu. I could spend 2 days preparing a sauce that would have been impractical in a regular restaurant. I hired just 3 staff, a sous chef I trained at Bella Note who had quit shortly after I left, a culinary student who worked part-time, and a server who handled beverages and table service. Our overhead was minimal compared to a full-service restaurant. 4 months after opening, Boston Magazine ran a glowing feature on Tavola Segreta, calling it the most exclusive and authentic Italian dining experience in the city. They awarded us 5 stars, one more than Bella Note had ever received. I carefully avoided mentioning my connection to my family's restaurant in any press, using only my first name professionally. Those who knew. Those who didn't simply experience my food without preconceptions. Meanwhile, I heard through industry gossip that Bella Notte was struggling. Marco Valentini's modern Italian menu had alienated longtime customers while failing to attract enough new ones to compensate. Their Saturday night reservations, once impossible to get without booking weeks in advance, were now available same day. I felt no satisfaction in their difficulties. Despite everything, I didn't want my family's legacy to fade away. The restaurant had stood for something important in the community for decades. Then one Tuesday afternoon, 6 months after I'd left, my phone rang with Uncle Matteo's number. I almost didn't answer. We hadn't spoken since I'd signed the papers. But curiosity won out. "Hello, Uncle Matteo." There was a long pause before he spoke. "Elena, how are you?" "I'm well. Very well, actually." Another pause. "That's good. I've heard things. About a new place you've opened?" "Tavola Segreta." "Yes." He cleared his throat. "It sounds like you've created something special." "Thank you." I waited, knowing he hadn't called just to compliment me. "Elena, I need to ask you something." His voice had lost its usual authoritative tone. "James Peterson is coming to Bella Note next Friday." My heart skipped. James Peterson was the most influential food critic on the East Coast. His reviews could make or break a restaurant. "Marco quit last week," Matteo continued, the words rushing out now. "Creative differences," he said, "but really, the food wasn't connecting with our customers. We've lost nearly 40% of our regular clientele. We've been operating at a loss for 3 months." I closed my eyes, picturing the restaurant half empty on a Saturday night. The thought hurt more than I expected. "What are you asking me, Uncle?" "We need you, Elena, just for one night, to cook for Peterson. No one understands Bella Notte's heart like you do." The irony wasn't lost on me. The home cook with family recipes was now their only hope of salvation. "And after the review, what then?" Matteo sighed heavily. "I've made a terrible mistake. We all have. Bella Notte was never about trendy cuisine or impressing critics. It was about family, tradition, feeding people food made with love." His voice cracked slightly. "Your grandmother understood that. You understand that." I forgot it. I remained silent, letting him continue. "I'm not just asking you to cook for Peterson. I'm asking you to come back. Permanently, as executive chef and co-owner. We'll restructure the ownership. Equal shares between you, me, Anthony, and Maria." Now I was genuinely surprised. Anthony agreed to this. He's the one who suggested it, actually, after dining at your new place last week. That was news to me. I hadn't recognized him among my guests, though I'd been so busy I might have missed him. He said it was like tasting childhood again, but better. More refined, more thoughtful, but with all the heart intact. Matteo paused. "Please, Elena, help us say what your grandmother built." I should have felt vindicated, triumphant. They had driven me out and now were begging for my return. It would have been easy to refuse, to let them face the consequences of their decision. But Bella Notte wasn't just theirs. It was mine too, a piece of my history, my heritage, my heart. "I'll cook for Peterson," I said finally. "But I'm not closing Tavola Segreta. That's non-negotiable." Of course, Matteo agreed quickly. "Whatever you want. We can discuss the details after the review." After hanging up, I sat quietly on my apartment balcony, watching the sunset over Boston Harbor. I had built something beautiful and successful on my own terms. Returning to Bella Notte would mean diving back into family complications and compromise. Was I really considering it? But then I thought about Mana's kitchen, where I first learned to roll pasta dough at 5 years old. The dining room where generations of families had celebrated birthdays, anniversaries, graduations. The legacy that was bigger than any individual family member's ego or ambition. 2 days later, I walked into Bella Knott's kitchen for the first time in 6 months. The staff cheered when they saw me. Many were the same people I'd worked alongside for years. Some hugged me with tears in their eyes. Anthony and Maria hovered uncertainly by the office door until I approached them. "Thank you for coming," Anthony said stiffly, looking humbled in a way I'd never seen before. "I'm doing this for Nana," I replied. "And for the restaurant. Not for you." He nodded. "That's fair." For the next week, I worked with the kitchen staff to prepare for Peterson's visit, retraining them in techniques they'd forgotten under Marco's direction, reconnecting with suppliers I'd built relationships with over years. I revived the classics from our menu but refined them with techniques I perfected at Tavola Segreto. The marinara sauce simmered for 12 hours instead of 4. The pasta dough rested longer, creating a more perfect texture. Every element was pushed toward its ideal expression while remaining true to its origins. The night of Peterson's visit, I arrived at the restaurant 3 hours early to oversee every detail. The dining room had been restored to its classic elegance after Marco's modern minimalist makeover. White tablecloths again. Candles in old Chianti bottles. Black and white family photographs back on the walls. At precisely 7:30 p.m., James Peterson arrived with his wife. Uncle Matteo seated them at their requested table near the window, the same table where Peterson had sat during his last review 8 years earlier. The kitchen fell silent as I prepared his first course personally, a seemingly simple dish of handmade burrata with heirloom tomatoes, basil, and olive oil. But the burrata was made in-house that morning. The tomatoes were from a small farm in western Massachusetts, the basil from our rooftop garden, and the olive oil pressed exclusively for us by a small producer in Sicily. As each course emerged from the kitchen, I watched through the past as Peterson's expression shifted from professional neutrality to genuine engagement. By the time the tiramisu arrived, made with my grandmother's recipe but lightened with techniques I developed at Tavola Segreto, he was leaning back in his chair, gesturing animatedly as he spoke with his wife. After they left, Matteo came into the kitchen, his eyes bright. He asked to meet the chef, but I told him you preferred to let the food speak for itself. I nodded, finally allowing myself to exhale. We had done everything possible. Now we would wait. 2 weeks later, Peterson's review appeared online and in print. The headline alone made my heart swell. "Resurrection at Bella Knott. The soul of Italian cooking returns to Boston's North End." The review was everything we could have hoped for and more. Peterson wrote eloquently about the history of the restaurant, its place in the community, and the evident care in every dish. He awarded us a rare 5 stars and concluded with words that brought tears to my eyes. In a culinary world obsessed with novelty and spectacle, Bella Knott reminds us that true innovation often means perfecting tradition rather than abandoning it. Whatever changes have occurred in this storied kitchen, one thing is clear: the heart and soul of authentic Italian cooking beats stronger than ever within these walls. That evening, we gathered in the restaurant, Uncle Matteo, Anthony, Maria, and me, to discuss the future. The dining room was fully booked for the first time in months, buzzing with energy as servers delivered plates of food prepared according to my revised recipes. "The review has already impacted reservations," Anthony reported, looking genuinely happy for the first time since I'd returned. "We're booked solid for the next 6 weeks." "Elena," Matteo said carefully, "we've prepared the ownership documents as discussed. Equal shares, full creative control for you as executive chef." He slid the papers across the table. "But we understand if you need time to consider, given your success with Tavola Segreto." I looked around at their faces, hopeful, contrite, and genuinely respectful in a way they hadn't been before. Then I gazed out at the dining room filled with guests enjoying my food. My grandmother's recipes evolved through my own vision and skill. "I have a counter-proposal," I said, pulling out notes I prepared. "I'll return as executive chef and co-owner, but with some conditions." They leaned forward attentively. "First, I'll continue running Tavola Segreto 2 nights a week. I've built something valuable there that I'm not willing to abandon." Matteo nodded. "That seems reasonable." Second, we established a culinary training program here at Bella Not for disadvantaged youth interested in cooking careers, with scholarship opportunities. Anthony looked surprised but nodded. That could actually be good for our community standing and future staffing. Third, I continued, we document Nana's recipes properly, not just ingredients and methods, but the stories behind them. A proper cookbook that preserves the family legacy. Maria smiled warmly. I'd love to help with that. I have so many memories of Nana I've never properly recorded. And finally, I said, meeting each of their eyes in turn, we make decisions as a true family from now on. Equal voices even when we disagree. No more power plays or ultimatums. There was a moment of silence before Matteo extended his hand across the table. You drive a hard bargain, Elena. But fair. We agree to your terms. As we shook on it, I felt a sense of completion I hadn't expected. This wasn't about triumph or revenge. It was about finding the path forward that honored both innovation and tradition, both independence and family. 6 months later, Bella Not celebrated its 55th anniversary with a special event combining the best elements of the restaurant and Tavola Segreta. Past and present staff gathered alongside loyal customers for a feast that spanned generations of Rossi family cooking. As I moved through the packed dining room, stopping to chat with guests and share stories about the dishes, I caught sight of my reflection in the mirror behind the bar. For a moment, I thought I saw my grandmother standing beside me, her eyes bright with pride. Cooking is love made visible, I whispered to myself, her words now mine. In the end, what saved Bella Not wasn't just my culinary skill or the favorable review. It was the recognition that true success in food, as in life, comes not from chasing trends or critics' approval, but from honoring your authentic voice while remaining open to growth and change. My family had needed to lose me to understand my value. I had needed to leave to discover my own strength, and together we had found a way to preserve a legacy while building something new, proving that sometimes the most satisfying revenge isn't proving others wrong, but helping them see what's truly important before it's too late.